Chapter 25. "You like banana?" Anders said. "Don't you, old friend?" Yes I do," Steve whispered, stepping closer, watching the possum move its leathery nose along the decking, sniffing out chunks of banana. "Eat up," Anders said. "Eat it all." Then there was thunder in the sky. The possum turned, looking upwards, beyond Anders with its mouth open, showing banana. "Don't look so sad," Anders laughed. "There's plenty more mango." But it kept looking his way, as though utterly concerned with Steve, and the fists he was showing above Anders' head, as though it recognized them. Fists that break ribs, fists that send one through the night air, fists of a madman. "Well, what is it?" Anders said, watching the possum back away. "There's plenty of mango." Suddenly it jumped onto the balcony edge and urinated. Its body was low down, its back arched, its claws extended ready to strike, its eyes flickering between Steve and the branch above its own head. Steve's face was twitching now. He watched it escape into the tree, disappearing fast, scurrying away on the branch. He raised a fist as though ready to punch something, then paused, staring into the tree. "What was it?" Anders said with mouthfuls of fish. "What's wrong? Not ripe enough?" He drank wine and looked over his empty mug. "Come back tomorrow," he said, wearing a tipsy grin. "We'll have boiled eggs." His body slumped into his chair. The heat, the wine, the food had all left him lethargic. He poked bits of fish with his fork and topped up his mug. Then he lolled back, closing his eyes. "Ah, life," he whispered, still thinking about the possum. "Such simple pleasures." "You and that rat get along," Steve then said, touching Anders' head. "That you, John?" Anders laughed again. "Good job you came back. There's a storm brewing." Steve said nothing. He moved his fingers through Anders' hair, gently as though giving him a head massage. "There's bread on the side if you fancy a bite," Anders continued. "Fix yourself a drop too. My treat." He kept his eyes closed, but pointed to the bottle. "It's cool, crisp, sweet, all rather tasty," he said. "It's certainly got me on my way." Then he laughed. "Does the job." But Steve stayed where he was, and his fingers kept going. "Stop that," Anders said. "Stop pulling my hair." Now his fingers became more aggressive, pulling faster and faster. Yank, yank, yank. "Enough, I'm trying to relax." "Fuck you." Steve pushed and pulled him, holding his hair like a leash, forwards, backwards, rocking him in his chair. His feet came off the floor. His arms flapped about his sides. When he opened his eyes, he saw the dirty face of the madman glaring down on him. Although this was only in flashes, soon he was moving forward again, face-planting sardines, peppercorns and beetroot. The peppercorns burned his nostrils. The fork stabbed into his cheek. He reached for it, but Steve planted him face down in the beetroot again. "Are you a unicorn or something?" Steve asked, watching him sneeze out purple strings of snot. "You'll be shitting rainbows next." He then took the mug and began whacking him over the head with it until it was broken. Jagged handles stayed in his hand, and he cut Anders with it, running it along his forehead and shoulder while keeping hold of his hair, dragging him like a puppet and moving him in whichever direction he desired. Fish and beetroot smeared Anders' face. Blood ran into his eyes, blinding him. "Somebody help me!" he yelled, reaching his hand out on the table, trying to find something to protect himself with. "It's the madman!" He felt he was falling backwards. His body hit the floor. A kick to the stomach silenced him. There was no more yelling. He just thrashed about on the decking. Then, still blinded by blood, he began crawling around in circles as though lost. "Help me, someone!" "No one is coming," Steve said, taking the wine bottle and drinking from it. "It's just us again." He spat out the wine and looked at the bottle. "What is this shit?" Still holding the bottle, he picked up a chair and flattened Anders with it. Anders screamed. Blood showed through his vest along his spine. He was crying. He was asking for help. "I said there's no one." Steve tilted the bottle. He followed Anders, pouring wine over his cuts. "Cool and crisp and sweet," he said, watching him crawl away. "Does the job," he said. "Certainly does the job." He allowed Anders to escape through the doorway, still watching as he collapsed over a suitcase. his shoulders and knees going, his teeth chattering as though freezing cold. "I'll be with you in a minute," Steve said, calmly fingering sardines into his mouth from the table, staring at the fork in Anders' cheek. "That doesn't look comfortable," he said. "I'll take that in a minute. I'll put it in somewhere else." He laughed and sucked his fingers. "Not sure where yet." Using both hands, Anders quickly pulled out the fork and screamed again, turning over, stabbing it about in front of himself. "Stay away," he said. "I have a weapon." "But that was my job," Steve said calmly, approaching him. "I was looking forward to that." He kicked Anders' face and the fork dropped from his hands instantly. "That was a poor effort," he said. "Don't try that again." He walked away, leaving Anders sprawled across the suitcase. He ate sardines and bread on the balcony, with his back to Anders, as he watched the darkening sky. Anders looked around, seeing everything in a blurry white haze. He heard Steve's voice, but wasn't sure what he was saying. It sounded to Anders as though he was talking underwater. Everything sounded muffled and distant, and there was a terrible, high-pitched ringing sound between his ears. He closed his eyes and lay there listening to Steve's footsteps on the decking. Then it was silent. Some minutes passed, and he hoped it was over. He held his face where the fork had been and rolled off the suitcase. When he opened his eyes again, he was face to face with the madman. "Going somewhere?" Steve said, eating a piece of bread. "But we're having such fun." He stood up and put another piece of bread in his mouth. "Good food, good company. Why would you leave?" The music ended, and the jockey was speaking again. "Shit music, though," he said. "We can't have that." He took the radio and looked at it. "I'll bash your head with this," he said, coming back to Anders with the radio. "That should get the party going." Anders looked up with blinking eyes. He saw the radio in Steve's hand and his grinning teeth with saliva swaying on them, giving him the appearance of a rabid dog. Naturally, he raised an arm to protect himself, but Steve grabbed it, and suddenly Anders knew he'd made a mistake. "Oh, bash your arm instead," Steve laughed. "Okay, that works." And he did. He bashed it until the plastic broke around the radio, and wires and batteries flew through the air. A sickening pain ran through Anders' body. His screams filled the room. His skin turned white and he was retching, making sounds as though ready to vomit. "I'm having fun," Steve said. "Are you?" There was barely anything left of the radio now. He dropped it and tugged on the injured arm, pulling Anders across the room while his feet dragged lifelessly on the floor. To Anders, listening to his own screams was a strange experience. They were distant to him, as though not his own. "I think it's broken," Steve said. "Your arm, I mean, not the radio." He was on the decking now, face down in a puddle of wine. There was no light in the sky, only dull clouds and noises of thunder. Without resistance from Anders, Steve ripped off his vest and lifted him up. They looked like man and boy as he turned with him, keeping him upright, holding one arm across his chest. "Stand up," he said. "Keep still and stand up." He told him to face the clouds, and if he'd been a good boy, he'd soon be up there too. "Keep still," he said again, now with his arm around Anders' throat, tightening it on his windpipe. "Keep still now." With his other hand, he reached behind himself, feeling his back pocket. "Been saving a nice shiny one for you." He looked at the 50-cent piece in his hand. "Lovely." He was smiling, but not for long. Soon there was banging at the door, and he turned, looking into the room. "You cunt," he said. "Someone wants to join our party." He dropped Anders and told him to stay, but the request was a pointless one. Anders wasn't going anywhere. His eyes were closed. He wasn't moving. "It's me," a voice yelled. "Are you okay?" Bang, bang, kick, kick. The door rattled. "It's me, Henry." He kicked the door again. "You were screaming." Now he was shouldering the door, kicking, punching, shouldering, shouting. "I'm coming in!